everyone. Welcome back to Baybayin Conversation. So I'm Ria,
And I'm Luis.
and we are your conversation. No, ka-conversation for today. Yay! So again,
Conversation.
thank you guys. So thank you again for being with us. We are now on our third episode, and we are going to talk about everyone's favorite subject, history.
Kasaysayan.
That's right. Okay, so title natin is kasaysayan. So should we start with our names?
We can do that.
Speaking of, di ko pa, never, how many years na tayong friends? You never told me where your name originated.
Really? I haven't told you yet? Okay, so
The betrayal.
well, this is the first time I guess that you'll get to hear it then.
Yeah.
Okay, so my complete first name is Luis Antonio, and it's actually coming from the two names of my grandfather. So Luis is from my father's side and Antonio is from my mother's side. So they just combined the two from my grandfather's, and there you have it, Luis Antonio.
Antonio is such a regal name.
Oh,
Like very.
oh, thank you. It makes me remember back in college when one of our professors would call us and say, Jet Victoria Cabrera, ang mortal na kaaway ni Luis Antonio Baltos. Yeah, our professor would do that, like in front of everyone.
Imagine a class of different colleges reacting to that professor's way of expressing his comedic side
Mhm.
that only we can understand.
On some days, I would be called Don Luis Antonio, and Ria would be called Doña Jet Victoria.
That's so weird. Like, I know Victoria is
Is the
very
regal name. That's
regal,
the original regal name.
yes. But like, whenever that professor says my name, it sounds like I'm a bad person, you know? It's not like the it's not like Queen Victoria, but more like Victor. It's more like the Victorina from No Limitangere and El Filibusterismo. Like the
Ramasong
masungit donya.
na mata pobre
Like
type.
I don't get to be the good guy. Parang ganun.
So maybe you want to explain what's Jet? What's the origin of your unique name? Maybe that's the good
Okay.
side of your name. Cuz
Okay.
just to
So
let everyone know, I know the origin of Ria's name. So if you don't mind sharing to everyone, go ahead.
my my I think most of my friends know, like those who actually know me, know how the origins of my name came from. So Jet is actually composed of three parts. So the first part is the PN, which is silent, by the way. So it's PN as in the initials of my parents, Paul and Vida. Jet, the JET, came from Jet Li, who was um who my mom was watching when I was still in her tummy. And finally, the TE because I'm a girl. So if I wasn't a girl, if I came out as a boy, my name would just be PNJET. And I clarified that with her. That really was the case. And then Victoria is just a compliance because our eldest is Victor. The second eldest is Victoria, has Victoria as the second name. And me being the youngest, I was also called Victoria.
So what are your nicknames?
Oh, I have a lot of nicknames. I have my parents at my family calls me Pen. My high school friends and workmates call me Jet. Only my college friends call me Ria. But I do prefer Ria above all of my names. But I have been called several names, misspelled names. And I remember so well in college, like when during first day of class, since we attend mostly the same class, um, uh, Baldos, something with the B, something with the B, and then there would be a pause. Everyone in the class knew that it was me who was actually going to be
Yeah.
mentioned. Like everyone was all smiling and laughing because the professor didn't know
To
how to
pronounce
pronounce
your
my
name.
name. And then I would be like, here, present.
And then you would tell the professor how to pronounce it, right?
Yes. It applies to every single subject that I have been to. My ball professors have gotten it right. One professor actually called me Punjet,
Oh my god, for
like
real?
Pun jet. Yeah, all throughout the semester. No matter how much I tried to correct her, and I was with a bunch of social anthropology students, and everyone thought that's how my name was spelled. That's why when everyone in our college or in other colleges would call me, I would say, "Oh no, you can call me Ria." That's so much easier and less harder to explain than Jet because they would ask, "Eh, bakit may TN sa harapan? Bakit may TE sa dulo? Bakit Jet lang yung pronunciation?" It's a very long story.
Yeah, your name is just so unique.
Yeah, thank you. So before we um actually released the pilot episode, we had anong tawag dun, Luis? Parang teaser-ish about what we are going to launch. And we had received inquiries about why we named our podcast by Bayan Conversations. So I'm going to give the floor to who actually came up with the name and who actually wrote the history of this podcast. So Luis, take it away.
So, weeks before we started the Baybayin conversations, I reached out to Ria. And then I told her it was just jokingly, but it was half meant. I told her, "Hey Ria, I want to do a podcast with you." So I wasn't really expecting her to answer it seriously. So, like after a few hours when I got to read her response, she said, "Yes," with I think it was like three S's and a big exclamation point. And then I told myself, "Oh, now we're signing up into this." So I think it was like a couple days after when I told her, "Oh, let's make a call and then we could discuss like about topics and stuff." But right after I told that, I was already asking her a lot of questions. I kept asking her, "Hey, what would be our podcast series title? What would be our episode names? What would we talk about? What would be our general concept?" It was just like a long thread of questions that I was sending Ria. I think she was still asleep or maybe she was doing work. And there was not even a response and I just keep throwing questions at her. And then when she finally gave an answer, she responded to my question like what would be the title of our podcast series. And then her number one requirement was I think it would be best if the first thing or the title would capture something about us crossing boundaries because you know what we're really doing is we're crossing boundaries. I'm in the Philippines and you're in the US. That's what she told me. And then you know we're interacting via internet. So we're literally crossing boundaries. So I had to scratch my head because I need to consider that one thing because that was a good idea. So so since we're graduates of language and literature from the University of the Philippines, Baguio, we have an inherent love for language. So of course, I had to incorporate some wordplay on it and then a meaning behind all the titles. So I actually had three. I actually had three concepts or titles. It's still on my notepad. It's still on my notes on my phone, and I just took a screenshot of it and then sent it to Ria. And then when she saw the bye bye in conversations, she actually said, "Number three, no questions. Period." That's with a T. Period. And then now I'm gonna explain like how I came up with the bye bye in conversations. So
Before we get to that, I'm just gonna cut you off there and like commend Luis for the name making. Kasi I know that between the two of us, siya talaga yung magaling mag-come up with names. Ako maano lang ako sa ideas when it comes to content and stuff. Pero like naming them actually was it was a good idea to throw it to Luis because it wouldn't be as good as if it came from me. So yun lang. Go ahead.
yeah, so I really like doing word plays and thinking about titles because I think as what Ria said, I really like that concept of making titles. So when I was actually on my on the three options, when I already had three options, I wasn't contented yet. I had to make more because I'm not sure if Ria would like any of those three. But I couldn't think of anything else, and I told her, "Give me 2 days, and then I'll come up with a good title." So we ended up with three options. So the third one was Bye Bye in Conversations, and I won't tell you what the other two are because we might use it for some other purposes. So the Bye Bye in Conversations was actually follows what Ria required me of saying, crossing boundaries. So if you would notice, Bye Bye in is actually an overarching theme of our titles. So you could see the Bye Bye in script all over our episode names. So actually that was just a nod with our love for language. Baybayin is actually an old writing script of the Philippines that follows the alpha syllabary language of the Philippines. So since we love language, it has to be incorporated with our with the podcast title series as what I've mentioned earlier. So baybayin is also uh, can also be pronounced as baybayin, which is to spell out. So if you wanna say spell out this word in Filipino or in Tagalog, you would say baybayin mo ang salitang ito because spelling out things, that's a language thing for us. And then the third one, the third word, the third meaning for baybayin is actually coast or shore or dalampasigan, right? Something like that. A word close to it. So I would say that we might be standing on from one coast with another, like from Rhea standing from coast of the Philippines or baybayin ng Pilipinas, and I'm standing from baybayin ng Estados Unidos. So something like we're crossing boundaries, not literally, but in a metaphorical way through conversations. And that's where I come up with the conversation. Conversations was our way of breaking that boundary through the internet, like through conversations in the internet. And then that was the initial title, Just by Buying Conversations. And then I told myself that would be so boring because conversations wouldn't have the same flair as by buying. So what so I just went back and just looked at the word conversations. And then I just realized that podcasts are podcasts most of the time are in session. And then I just remembered that Ria and I met in Baguio. And then one of the most famous streets in Baguio is actually Session Road. So session there is actually a nod to Baguio City too, the place where we first met. Not on the actual street, but yeah, it's the most famous road in Baguio. So that's it. That's what I sent her. I just put all those notes that I told you on my note app, took a screenshot of it, and then sent it to Ria. And then that's when she said, Number three, because bye bye conversation was the third of the options. I have to save the best for last. And then she just said, number three, no questions, period. That's how we came up
Yeah.
with Bye Bye in Conversations.
Yeah. Another reason why I like the conversations part was not only because it was witty, but also because it reminded us, me personally, it reminded me of our memories along Session Road,
Mm-hmm.
like the late night conversations in Volantes or like dinner at
Mm-hmm.
Viscos. There was this one time we were at Porta Vaga wherein we had to pretend like we were going to eat. Do you remember that particular time wherein we had to go to a certain cake store,
Mm-hmm.
and then we had to pretend like we were we were going to stay there. I'm not sure, I don't remember the context base actually, pero like um nag nag nag-gather tayo, tapos parang kunwari mag-o-order tayo tapos aalis tayo
Ah.
agad. Parang gano'n.
Ah.
May gano'n tayong instance. So, like, Session Road, and then after that, the night market and stuff. So, it really gave us a lot of fond
Mm-hmm.
memories. So I went with the conversations without without hesitation talaga. So that is how we came up with Baybayin Conversations. And so far, the acceptance of the audience with our name is very heartwarming,
Mm-hmm.
I would say. Diba?
Yes.
Like they there was someone who we were acquainted with who sent me a message, and he told me that it was amazing, that it was good, ganito ganyan, and then I sent it over to Louise, and we were like, "Aw."
Yeah. Yes.
That's the best response that we can have.
Yes.
Aw. So, okay. So after that invitation, and after the coming up with names, of course the next thing we did was like preparing for the content itself. So as what Louise mentioned earlier, like we wanted a podcast that um not only talks about regular issues, or like um the things that other podcasts do, but what we want to explore is like um these topics and more, kasi nga we never settle for less.
Yes.
Maisingit
Uh,
lang. um Kumbaga parang hindi kami satisfied na pinag-uusapan lang namin. Gusto namin inaaral namin siya, and gusto namin inaaral namin siya
mm-hmm.
together. So when we plan for content for each episode, um lagi kaming may intellectual discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Aside sa
Uh,
kwentuhan, lagi kaming may intellectual discussion about say the title, or like what the contents will be, or like how are we going to tackle this particular content, and so on. So um I guess what made us different in comparison to the other podcasts maybe is that we go beyond the surface, and we explore it through an intellectual lens, or through a scholarly lens. Kaya which is also a nod to us being scholars ng
yes.
bayan. So hindi lang kami mga uh, podcasters, but more importantly, mga scholar kami.
Yeah.
So ayun. Ikaw, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so Ria and I would actually discuss like what would be our episode title, and then we would just be throwing ideas with each other. If this is a good one, what are the pros and cons with this title? And then at the end of the day, or at the end of a couple days, that's when we decide, oh, this would be our next episode's title. And then as we conceptualize the themes that we talk about on our episode, we have to make sure that we still follow and make sure that we adhere to that title.
So, before we start, kasi we don't, when Luis and I begin our video calls, we don't start right away with, um, the podcast recording, even though we have the content beforehand. We always have, discussions, as I mentioned earlier. We sometimes we would take 20 minutes and longer before we actually start the recording, because kasi we would um we would have sidetrack kwentuhan, we would have sidetrack discussions, and then ma-realize namin, hala, 20 plus minutes na pala
Mag-start.
bago kami
Mm-hmm.
mag-start. Tapos even when we are actually starting, parang ang dami naming may hesitation kung ito na ba, game na ba, ganyan. So, and then the as for the recording itself, it just naturally goes. Of course, there we have to cut some things, ganyan, and then we would edit other things. Luis does that part. And then even after we record, like, what you guys should know is that our video calls don't stop after we
Mm-hmm.
record the podcast. We would take hours,
Yes, just
um,
talking.
just talking, yeah. Hindi pa kasama dun yung pre, yung during, even the post
Mm-hmm.
podcast recording would take hours.
And then, as Ria mentioned, like after the call, you wouldn't believe it, but if only we could use those footages to account for another episode, we will. But no, we won't.
The reason why they are after the recording of the podcast is because they are not things to be mentioned on camera.
Yes, unfortunately. And then after hours of talking, sometimes our phone calls would even last for 5 to 6 hours with just us talking. Then only, yeah, an
Average.
average. And then only about 40 minutes max of that would be just used for the actual episode, and all the rest are just us talking. And then after yeah, that's actually true. That's what I meant with, if only we could use the remaining time for more episodes, but not but no. It would steer away from what is the goal of bye bye conversations.
The, it would steer from the core of the
Yes.
podcast.
Yes.
It would just be another chikahan with Ria and
Yes.
Luis.
Maybe we could create another podcast series with just chikahan with Ria and Luis.
Yeah. And then everything will be exposed.
Mm-hmm.
Ready ka na ba dun, if ever?
As long as you're ready, we can go. Yeah.
Maybe in the future.
Yeah, maybe in the future, far future. Not
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 near
near
future.
future. Let allow us to master the courage first before we actually do that.
Yes. Yes, actually.
Yeah, and then after the actual calls with each other, it takes about 2 to 3 days maybe to for the episode release. What we actually do is, through the internet, we just show this, show that, discuss this, discuss that. And then while I am editing the video, I show Ria some clips with it. And then by the time that she approves it, by the time that we get to approve that, oh, we're good with this episode, we're good with the audio, we're good with this. That's when we finalize with the episode and then upload it on YouTube, with Facebook, and then Spotify. And then before we get there, we create all the covers, the thumbnails, and everything. So we make sure that we're even on all platforms.
And on that note, don't forget to like and subscribe our page on all the channels that Luis has mentioned. So we have a Facebook, we have a YouTube, we have a Spotify, and we have an Anchor. And when you go to our Anchor, you will see other platforms where you can listen to us. um I don't I don't memorize all of those, even though I am the one managing the Spotify and Anchor, actually the social media accounts of um the Baybayin conversations, except for YouTube, because Louis handles that one. But for Facebook, Spotify, and Anchor, most of the time it's either me or Louis. Anyway, going back, sometimes when we finish our recordings early, be it on audio or on video, we schedule the release. So say we approved on it, because our usual release is like 8 p.m. in Philippine time, right? So usually we get it done by 12 o'clock ish in Philippine time, or like later in the
Yes.
afternoon. So we schedule it for release at exactly 8 p.m. But there are instances wherein um it gets kind of delayed due to the size was too
Mm-hmm.
big or the video was too long, which we encountered during the last episode. So we had to delay the uploading of the
Yes.
video. Nonetheless, for most of the videos, and since we have already experienced that issue, we are going to make sure that that doesn't happen again. So we will do our best to ensure that we are right on schedule, and so that you guys can enjoy our company on your typical Wednesday
Nights.
night. And what time is it there?
It's
Wednesday
Wednesday
morning?
morning at 5 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time.
Yes. Now, before the release of Panimula, some friend of mine asked me what he can expect from the podcast. And I was sort of taken aback, because at that point we haven't really discussed that in detail
Mm-hmm.
yet.
Yes.
So I almost wanted to cry out to Louise, I need help answering this specific question. I do not know what to say, because um we are still we are going to be honest and transparent with you guys that um we don't have everything
Planned
planned, as
out.
in planchado. So there are instances wherein we would still have to come up with topics like days before the actual
Mm-hmm.
recording. uh there are things that we have planned right now, but we can't um shoot them
Mm-hmm.
now. They are plans for the future pa. So we are exploring possibilities at this point. But what you can expect is an intellectual discussion about a certain topic, about a certain issue. We will have some guests over, depende kung available sila. We can assure you that this will not be a boring conversation.
Yes. And then to add to Ria's point, one of the three factors that we always look at when we start a discussion is we have to make sure that we have entertainment, we have discourse, and we also have narrative. So as long as those three things fall into place with our episode, with our concept, we always go about completing the episode. So once we get our guest, we'll always follow that we have all those three factors.
Um, Thank you once again for staying with us. And I do hope that you can share this video or our page to your friends. Let them know that we exist
Yes.
and let them join the fun alongside you guys. And so, with that, we can now end the podcast and proceed with our literature
Literature
trivia. Ding, 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 ding,
trivia.
ding, 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 ding. So, for the first two episodes, we had language trivia, but we do not want to settle for just language trivia. So, we ought to like go to the next discipline and talk about literature. Hindi ko matatapatan yung trivia ni Luis during the last episode about code switching and code mixing. But I will do my best. I don't want to disappoint my fellow ball peers and my professors. Baka balikan nila ako. Okay, so the trivia that I would like to share with you is about printing. So we all know what printing is. It's the act of putting text on a certain material so that it can be read. Right now, we see print in the form of books, magazines, newspapers, and whatnot. But these are all mass produced. But if we go back to how the act of printing originated, um, there is a rich culture of um, printing. So we can discuss it in terms of the Asian um Asian Mediterranean ways and then the Western ways, which came later. So starting with the Asian and Mediterranean ways, the Chinese specifically, they already had um, a way of printing way back during the first few hundreds AD. So that's like 110 AD, if I remember it correctly. And then the first published book during that time was the Diamond Sutra. And then they also had their own version of the movable press, um, or like the machine used for printing. So even before we see printing as how we see it now, the Chinese had already developed a way to mass produce certain texts. However, because the materials and the labor and the um, overall the everything involved in printing was expensive, only the rich people can have access to it. Now, as trade becomes a part of society, or as trade becomes a part of everyone's lives, there was a barter of materials, there was a barter of ingredients, and also there was a barter of things used to produce printed articles such as paper and
Mhm.
ink. So the paper and ink traveled into the Westerners by the 15th century. And when you think of printing, or if you know enough about printing, the first person that would come to your mind was Johannes Gutenberg, who was allegedly the first person to have produced the printed book in the West. And their first book, or Johannes's first book, was the Johannes Gutenberg Bible. Now, of course, this is open to dispute, as there was a wide gap between Johannes Gutenberg and the Chinese way of printing. But at the moment, or as far as Western history is concerned, it was Johannes Gutenberg who initiated the printing and invented the printing press. Now, due to industrialization and so on, which came after that, um, printing went beyond just for the rich, which was also the same with the Chinese, but also the act of printing has made it possible for not for the working class people to have access to materials, which gave them access to education, which gave them access to religion, and so on. So alongside industrialization came mass production, not only of fabric and textile, but also of printed materials. So because of the industrialization and the machine printing, the printing machine press rather, so it it continued to improve into what we know today as mass production printing. So that is our literature trivia for today. Yeah.
Thank you, Ria. You can correct me when I say that up to date, the Bible is still one of the most printed books in the entire world. So it originated with Gutenberg printing the Bible, and now it is still the most printed book, right? Am I right?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. And the thing with the Gutenberg Bible is it's not complete,
Mm-hmm.
and the versions that are present now are of course far from what
Yes.
Gutenberg had originally
Yes.
produced. So now there is a King James version, there's a New International version, there's a wide variety of Bible versions now. But when you compare it to the Gutenberg Bible, it was really very different from the Bibles that we see today. Nonetheless, you are right that Bible is still one of the, if not
It's not.
the
Yes.
most printed in the world. So thank you guys once again for sticking around up to the end of this video. So don't forget to like our page, subscribe to our channels, listen to us on Spotify and Anchor. And once again, I'm
And I'm
Ria,
Luis.
and thanks for stopping by our conversation for today.
Bye.
Bye.